This is the World Organic News Podcast for the week ending 30th of May 2016. John Moore reporting. This week we begin with composting. There are a number of posts this week on the gentle art of composting. In particular, Zen and the Art of Composting from the Gulf Coast Gardening blog, the Farm Files, a few more composting tips from the McNeil Family Farm blog, and Worm Poo, Yay, from the Garden Karma blog. These posts point to a number of ways to compost. Firstly, there's the pile method. This can be either hot or cold. The hot version is quicker, but takes a little more skill. If this worries you, then follow the cold method. Either way, the final product is what we're looking for, so don't beat yourself up over composting, just do it. Nature, as we've said before, doesn't compost. Nature mulches. So whilst composting isn't natural, in air quotes, it is organic. It is a human-developed technique working with the available resources to create soil. And creating soil is a wonderful thing to do, particularly critical given the losses that have occurred since the Second World War. See podcast 17 for more on that. Think of compost as concentrated soil with food, and you'll be on the way to using it correctly. Some people dig it in. I don't. I spread it on top of the existing garden beds, but then again, I never dig, I layer. Digging destroys fungal connections within the soil, which have to then be rebuilt by the fungus. True enough, digging them up releases some plant food, but the fungal systems do this themselves when fully functioning. So for this reason, no-dig gardens may not be as productive in the first season, but they can be. Creating your compost first is a good way to ensure the productivity of your gardens. The other way to compost, in inverted commas, is to vermicompost. This technique varies from standard composting in that it uses earthworms to convert organic material into useful growing media. Because the worms require a lower temperature than hot composting, the process of vermiculture will not kill off weed seeds in the same way as hot composting. In a no-dig system, using vermicompost, that is, the processed materials left by the worms, or worm poo, I find weeds are rarely an issue. Those which arise are easily plucked out and left to rot on the garden surface. Either standard compost material or vermicompost material can, and indeed I would argue, should be used as a liquid fertiliser. This is done by creating a compost tea. A feed bag, pair of pantyhose or any other woven material that will hold the compost while allowing the gentle flow of water through is good to use. I hang a kilo of compost in 10 litres of water for a week, then drain off the liquid and break down 1 part compost tea to 10 parts water and spray onto leaves, flowers and or the soil surface. I usually stop applying this to edible plant parts 2 weeks before harvest, just to stop any tainting of the food with odd flavours. So compost as if your life depended upon it, because it just might. Certainly the life of your soil benefits from it. And now a word from our sponsor. This episode of the World Organic News Podcast is brought to you by Gem Biscuits. Gem Biscuits is a small family-run enterprise who hand-make gluten-free sorghum flour-based biscuits and cookies. Choc chip, hazelnut choc chip and coffee hazelnut choc chip. All these are made with, of course, organic ingredients. And these biscuits are great. Please check out the website gembiscuits.com. That's gembiscuits.com. The link is in the show notes. Now to a few posts which caught my eye this week. Firstly, vertical gardening in a polytunnel from the blog Adventures in Going and Growing. Vertical gardening as a means of intensification makes sense. Stacking plants means you get more plants from the same area. Add a polytunnel for season extension and you have a winning combination. This post has some great ideas for upcycling soft drink bottles and stacking propagation units in the tunnel. The limit of these two technologies, vertical gardening and polytunnels, are matched only by the limits of our own imaginations. I'd also like to mark the passing of Mel Bartholomew, who passed earlier this month. He was the developer of a system called Square Foot Gardening, and not surprisingly, Mel was an engineer. This week we had a couple of posts on the method. from the blog Joel Garden, Setting Up a Square Foot Garden, and from the blog 1 Square Foot at a Time, Yes, This Is Real. Both are well worth a read. There is inherent logic to the system, and it does produce really well. Adaptable to either the dig or no-dig schools of thought, and applicable to areas from, 1 square foot up to market garden size. Basically, each square foot unit of soil is planted to either one large vegetable, say a cauliflower, or 4 smaller vegetables, carrots or 16 radishes, and so on for whatever grabs your fancy. Check out the posts if you're interested in learning more. There is an extensive amount of information on this system, and it does work. And that brings us to the end of this week's podcast. If you've liked what you've heard, I'd really appreciate a review on iTunes. This helps others to find us. Thanking you in advance. Any suggestions, feedback or criticisms of the blog or podcast are most welcome. Please email me at podcast@worldorganicnews.com. A transcript of each episode is available on the blog at www.worldorganicnews.com under the tab Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back in a week.